Hey everybody, Braden here. Welcome back to another tournament game. This is the last one I played before my break and before, well, the pandemic and everything like that. So let's jump into it. I'm playing with the black pieces against Kevin, and I play the Caro Kann. We see d4, d5, takes. So we see this is a Panov when they exchange, and then also play c4. It's to go for an isolated pawn position and try to go for a ton of activity. And that's exactly what happens in this game. I played knight f6, knight c3, and g6. I think I was a bit too stubborn here. I think maybe something like e6 or knight c6 is just better, and accepting that if we get a position like this with bishop c4, maybe e6 is just the best way to play it. And the whole idea here is obviously if they take and take back, the position is just equal, and as black we should probably be happy that's the case. Instead g6 was played, queen b3, and I didn't want to take because after takes, bishop takes, this just looks scary. I think the move e6 is possible, but this looks really bad after d5, where they just try to open up the center, where they just have a huge lead in development, especially because they didn't have to even move their bishop except for when they captured, which is usually something they're pretty happy to do. Yeah, so bishop g7 instead, c takes d5, I castled, so pretty much my idea here is that I give up a pawn, but I just argue that one of the pawns will eventually fall, and then the other pawn will be weak because it's an isolated pawn position. See bishop e2, knight bd7, knight bishop to f3, knight b6, and a4. And this maneuver, prevents me from actually just getting my pawn back immediately, and that's really annoying. And now a4, their idea is just to kick my knight away, where now I can't take on d5. I ended up playing a5, which strategically doesn't look so great because it does give up the b5 square. And the argument here I think that white was also making is that if I play a5, even though I have the b4 square as well, I think b4 is a lot harder to actually put a piece on than b5. So it's just already hard to find other moves than a5, as I think maybe I shouldn't have played this g6 idea in the opening. But if we go further, a5, knight e2, and then I go bishop g4. I just want to trade, and then after trade, I bring my knight back and hopefully win the pawn. They take on g4, I take on g4. Castles. I played rook c8 here. I think maybe it makes sense to not just not waste any time at all and try to go for something like knight f6, with the goal of hopefully just getting the pawn back. Though after knight f4, it does pose an interesting question. Do I want to kick the knight out, and how? And it's not actually so easy to kick that knight away from f4 that's protecting d5. Unfortunately, all of my pieces are not perfectly placed. I'd say these two pieces are relatively well placed, but the knight on b6 and the queen on d8, they don't really know where they want to go. The queen on d8 feels like it's already kind of on its best square, and the knight on b6, if you could just teleport it anywhere, I guess b4. But I just don't see how it gets there, right? The only way I can see how is like this funny knight d7, b8, a6, b4 maneuver, which is, it just takes too long, and in these types of positions, wasting that type of time is just not possible. I played rook c8 instead. This was a long time ago, so trying to recollect all of the reasons why I played these moves might not be as possible. So I'll just try to go along with what I think I was thinking and what I think about the positions now, as I think that's all I can do. Anyways, so we see bishop to f4 here. I played knight to f6, now trying to again go for the d5 pawn, but they make this really interesting move d6, which creates complications because, well, now I get an isolated pawn just like them, but arguably all of their pieces are better than mine. So I take, and then they play knight b5, and now actually my opinion has changed. After rook c6, because this was necessary to defend the pawn, and rook ac1, I played what I think is dubious. As far as I can see, there's no straight up refutation to the move, but it's just it's just pointless. So again, as I mentioned, the knight kind of wants to be on b4 here, and I was so scared of the d pawn hanging that I didn't go for more activity like I should have. There's actually a funny move here, knight b to d5. And this pawn isn't actually hanging. And, okay, we have to look at this. Rook takes c6, pawn takes c6, knight takes d6. This doesn't work because knight takes f4 at the end of the day. And there's no knight b7 intermezzo because we can take on e2 with check. So this would win a piece here. Instead, they'd have to probably just go back. And then we can look at things like taking on f4, getting a lone bishop on the board where things are kind of open. I think computer would recommend something like queen c7. I think I checked with this. And I don't think black has anything to be too upset over. I think this opening and this like early middle game have gone quite well. But knight c8's just a step in the wrong direction. I understand the idea. I think I was really scared of d6 hanging. But unfortunately, now I just have no space after the next move, d5, which I know I did not see in the game. And the big problem with this is now d6 is stuck on d6 forever. And there's not really a way to get out of that issue here. And after rook takes c1, rook takes c1, all of my pieces are a little sad. It's not losing or anything, but this position is a lot more difficult to play than the ones I've shown before here. So I end up playing rook e8, trying to go for activity here. I don't think this is so wrong. I think knight c7 can be met with like rook e4 or something. Like I can just get activity and I'm not too worried of the knight attacking my rook or anything. And in fact, maybe the rook even goes to b4, which is kind of like a funny, weird outpost that I finally get to use. But yeah, this is all not so clear. And after knight e to c3, I played queen e7, which feels like a somewhat natural move. And I don't think there's anything 100% wrong with it, but it just kind of shows how bad my position is, where it feels like queen e7 is something I have to play. And the reason why I say it's highlighting how bad my position is mainly because now after something like knight c7, if they did try that, obviously they can't try it yet, but let's just say they move their knight and then try it. The c7 square I'm pretty much just giving up on and trying to go for counterplay on the e file with both pieces lined up. But where's the counterplay? In fact, what squares am I controlling more than them? They're controlling the e3 and e5 squares with the bishop. The knight's controlling e2 and e4. The rook's controlling e1. They play h3 because now there's no queen e1 check with back rank mate. But yeah, again, the position's just really depressing because I'm just stuck defending this pawn on d6 here. And there were ways to get out of that earlier that I just didn't find. So I played knight d7 in the game. And they played bishop to e3, and I played knight e5, which is a strict blunder, which is really interesting. The recommendations I remember seeing were things like b6, queen h4, and knight c5. At least I wanted to see what would happen if knight c5, because I think it's important to look at activity here. And at first, I wasn't so sold on this position for white, until I realized that although they do have an isolated d pawn here, there's just no way to attack it ever. And even though this bishop looks good, the space that they have because of the d pawn kind of disproves the bishop's use almost. The knight on c8 is still really annoying to get into the game. For example, knight to d6. The problem is knight takes d6, queen takes. And after winning a pawn, queen c6 is threatened, just like going for even queen trades or something I think would benefit white. Maybe not even that, maybe just like knight b5 followed by d6, straight up giving the b pawn because the d pawn is so unbelievably strong. This position genuinely, yeah, it looks pretty miserable, unfortunately. And I don't really see a solution here. So, knight e5. And it's interesting why this is such a bad move. The knight on d7 was interestingly good because it controlled first off the b6 square, which could be a weakness, and also it controlled, it actually not controlled, it closed the 7th rank off, so that rook wouldn't land on c7 in such an annoying way. So my opponent played knight e2, and now rook c7 is coming, and that's really annoying. And if I bring my knight back now, well, unfortunately, rook c7, it's too late. It already got there. I just wasted a bunch of time in a position where I really can't waste any. And just for reference, I'm just checking this with like an online engine, so it's a bit weaker, but generally they should still have a good evaluation of positions. It's almost +4 in this position for white, and it's just hopeless, which is really interesting because it's hard to find a reasonable move. Let's just say b6, right? b6 looks fine here, and then you see knight d4, and you realize, oh no, I've just weakened the c6 square way too much, and there's nothing I can really do about it. Not even just that, but there's actually really funny threats here. For example, I just want to show a cool line here. Let's just say bishop takes d4, or no, let's just say queen d8, because I don't want to even entertain giving that piece up. First off, knight c6 is just really annoying, but there's also this crazy move, knight e6, just getting the bishop anyways, where after f takes e6, takes e6. This is just lost, because right now e7 check is threatened, winning the queen. And if you play something like, I don't know, queen e7, rook takes d7, rook e7, maybe just rook takes d7 anyways, right? Rook e7, rook takes d7. And if you take, check, right? That's the biggest issue. And yeah, black's just getting mated here. I played queen f6, trying to avoid rook c7 with tempo, but they played knight c7 instead, which is also quite strong, because they're just going for the b pawn here. And there's nothing I can do about that, actually. After rook f8, they took, and after knight d3, just rook c3, which is a really interesting move. I think it might be poor. Feels more like something like rook b1 might be better, with the idea that taking on b2 isn't really possible because of bishop d4. But rook c3, the b2 pawn is able to be taken. Oh wait, no, it's not. Sorry, bishop d4 actually wins the game. Even still, actually, wait, I'm being a silly goose here. Queen takes b2. The knight is actually defending the rook. My bad. Anyway, so yeah, I played knight c5, which is supposedly the only move, actually. So apparently I played better back then. And after knight c5, bishop takes c5, and d takes c5. The point is, if I can trade off some of the pawns, I think that will benefit me. For example, like, let's just say rook takes c5. My first thought was queen takes b2, but I think maybe knight d6 is just a little bit better first. And you're trying to just prove that you have more activity now, which is actually a really interesting argument. Let's just say knight d6. Queen b6 is only move, apparently, to not be worse. And then something like queen e5 and knight e4 could come. And surprisingly, black has enough compensation for the two pawns, which is really surprising to me. They took, but they ended up playing knight b5 instead, which I think is probably just a better move anyways. It feels just a bit more controlled, where their idea here is, yeah, they're just going to go the pawn up, maybe even play or consider something like b3 here, and then take the pawn, try to keep all of their material. And honestly, it's kind of hard to prove the compensation as black. Like, it's not something that's a strength of mine then, and probably not now, because this position is hard to talk about, actually. So we see queen e5 and rook c2, and supposedly I'm better after queen e4 here. Again, I would just like to remind everyone that these positions I haven't seen in a while, and I thought I would just kind of do like a review of them, still cover them, but kind of just have it be a bit more relaxed as I talk about them here. So instead, rook e3 feels a bit more natural. Attacking the queen. At the same time, it does give up the b2 pawn. What I'm noticing here is, but the thing is, although it does, this d pawn starts running. I believe. Let's just say it says queen c6. Queen a1 check. Let's just say queen c2. No, queen a1 check is good because it wins the pawn. And d5 or d6 isn't playable yet because knight takes d6 is actually a funny tactic here. D6, knight takes d6, and now all of a sudden I think white's just lost. Let's say queen takes d6, queen takes b5. So there's still a lot of tricks in the position, surprisingly. All of white's pieces are just kind of not really well placed. But yeah, okay, rook c2 anyways. I played queen to e4 in the game, actually. Knight to a3, and I took on a4, which honestly I think is fine. I'm just trying to equal the material balance here. Queen c6, and I took on c6. Nowadays, I don't know how likely I would have, mainly because the pawn's really annoying on c6. It's harder to find an amazing move. Though, my first impression is that I would want to play, like, I'd want to keep my queen on the b file, because I feel like if I take on c6 and that pawn gets to c6, it's hard to actually scoop that pawn up. But let's just say queen b4 and then we trade. I'd be a lot more willing to do something like this. I don't know if this is actually correct, though. This is just an assumption. Where now I take on b2, and now it's just the d pawn I have to worry about, but I feel like that's a lot more manageable. At least that's my first impression of the position. But I end up taking on c6, rook to e8, and unfortunately, yeah, the c5 pawn's gonna just fall at some point. They play king f1 because they can't take yet. Bishop f8 now to defend the pawn. Surprisingly, that's a blunder. Knight a7 was a necessary move here, and I think the idea is kind of the same here, where I'm just trying to pick up. This time I think I'm trying to pick up the c pawn, actually. If takes, then I take with the knight, and the b pawn is actually pretty weak, which is actually, yeah, that's fair to say. But after bishop to f8, their pieces just get very active, and I can't really do anything about it. They play knight c4. Knight c3 is supposedly better. I believe with the idea potentially of even knight a4, or bringing one of the knights to b5, followed by c7 here. So yeah, knight c4, a4, knight to c3 here. I played rook e6, which I thought was a good move originally, because I thought maybe I can pick up the pawn or create complications. Turns out knight e7 actually does apparently pick up the pawn here. After this, rook d8, c7 is impossible. Knight b7 it says, and now I can play rook c8 and finally pick up the pawn here. Rook takes c6, I'm guessing, or even knight takes c6. It says a3 actually, which is kind of funny. I think the idea is just the further it is away, the weaker it could potentially be. But yeah, so I played rook e6 instead, and now this is just a fatal mistake. c7 was played. I played king g7 because I noticed that it's actually impossible to pick up the pawn now. Let's just say rook c6 here. The problem is they always have moves like knight b5, and unfortunately the pawn cannot be touched. So yeah, in this position, yeah, king g7 was played, rook d2, rook a6, and they played rook d8. And actually I just resigned here, because yeah, the game's over. I'm just losing a piece by force now. For example, if rook a8, which is a really tempting move, they do, I think the simplest way to win the game is just knight b6. After knight takes b6, they can just take on a8 here, and unfortunately if I take, then they just promote. This is completely resignable, and any other move I make, they're just gonna be taking on c8 here, either with the knight or the rook here. So I ended up resigning after rook d8 because again the pawn's going through. This was an interesting one, and this ended my super duper long win streak that I was on. So that was unfortunate, but I think there was some interesting things to learn from this game. First off, don't play the Caro Kann. That's half joke, half joke. Mainly, I think the most important thing is I gotta stop being as stubborn. As I go through this, I really was not interested in like in this early position. I was not interested in avoiding imbalances. I wanted to make sure there was an imbalance of the IQP, because you're always told at a lower level, like even not a lower level, just like all levels, you're told isolated pawn is a weak pawn. So like let's just say knight c6 takes. This is a weak pawn because it cannot be defended. But it's important to recognize and remember that black or white has the isolated queen pawn here. The side with the isolated queen pawn does have some advantages themselves. That usually involves development or activity, and sometimes things like kingside attacks. So that's something to watch out for. And yeah, sometimes you are just kind of forced in these types of positions. I'd say nowadays I'd be much more likely to play something like e6, at least consider it. But back then I simply wasn't. So that's just something I wanted to mention here, is that I think that this is something that highlighted a weakness of mine before the pandemic. So that was game number 1. I hope you guys enjoyed it. It was a bit more relaxed, but I have a lot of games to cover, so I kind of wanted to just go at this with a relaxed pace, and then when we get to the newer games where I actually have a better, more active memory of it, I can talk about it a bit deeper. So hold on with me. Hope you guys enjoyed this anyways, and I'll see you in the next game. Bye bye.